Welcome everyone to GW4W's Heart to Heart series. We are delighted to have an amazing group of panelists today to dig into the topic of HR leadership, our next normal, and gender equity. What does it mean going forward? How have things changed, and what can we do to make this a little bit better when we get through the pandemic? And really, what are some of the silver linings that we've seen over the past 8 months, as difficult as this may have been? So to lead this conversation, I am really delighted that we have our member and founder and CEO of Fabric, Karen Detje. Her experience ranges from startups to Fortune 500 companies, including Pepsi and Allied Signal and Arco. And Karen's been the Chief Human Resources Officer at several global organizations, including, and I'm going to see if I pronounce this properly, Quokka? Quokka, okay, there we go. Quokka Sports, Publicis Groupe Media, and Tory Burch, which is where we originally met. Our panelists are the amazing Denise Cooper, who some of you may have seen on an earlier episode. She is the founder of Remarkable Leadership Lessons. She's held VP roles at People's Energy, Lending Tree, Budget Car Rental, and The Gap. We have Fulvia I'm going to ask you to pronounce your last name for me.
Goncalves.
Thank you. She is the HR Director, South America at Louis Vuitton, and held senior HR roles at GFK and Tory Burch. And we also have Sally Yu, who is a very seasoned HR professional out of Hong Kong with 25 years of experience in various HR realms. Sally has held senior positions in different prestige organizations, primarily in fast fashion and luxury sectors. And as you can see, we're going to get quite the global perspective on this topic. And I am really looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say. With that, I will turn the conversation over to you, Karen.
Thanks. It is great to be here and great to see everyone today, and looking forward to a very robust conversation on topics that I think are near and dear to all of us as HR leaders. There's so many areas to touch on, but we thought we would focus today a bit more on communication and language and how specifically that impacts women in the workplace. And we're going to divide our conversation up into 3 separate areas. The first one will be speaking up and speaking out, how women generally are perceived at meetings and what kinds of communication styles they leverage that are different than men that might impact their effectiveness. The second area we're going to touch on are areas that are very interrelated: performance, feedback, and development. And we're going to look at some differences between the kinds of feedback and development opportunities that are often given to women and not to men, and vice versa. And lastly, we'll put all that together and really take a look at leadership and really thinking about how do organizations view leaders today, whether they're male or female, how are they defined, and how does that help or impair women's ability to move up in the workplace. And again, having global people here, HR leaders, everyone's going to bring their HR hat, their personal hat, their leader hat, their cultural hat. So it should be a really interesting discussion. Okay, great. So the first topic we're going to touch on is speaking up and speaking out. And we've all been in plenty of meetings where someone is speaking out, and what happens? You listen, you pay them respect, their kind of status goes up. But what we have learned through a lot of the research is that it depends whether or not the speaker is a male or a female. And it also often depends on whether or not the speaker is either providing ideas or pointing out problems. And as an example, some of the research tells us that when speaking up and sharing ideas, often that tends to benefit men, but not women. The other area we're going to touch on is what I think a lot of companies call executive presence. So how effective you are using your communication style. And we know in general that there are vast differences in how men and women actually communicate. And a few examples that we all have experienced are, again, not to overgeneralize, but I will have to generalize a little bit. Definitely men will tend to speak more loudly, whether it's in a one-on-one meeting or a group meeting. Women will tend to speak more softly, more succinctly, be more concerned about taking time, and also take less credit for their achievements. Men also may tend to use a more aggressive or confrontational approach and style, where women feel like that's just not a natural style for women, and often they can't do their best work in that kind of environment. And they feel that people are then challenging their ideas when they're in that type of engagement. And lastly, as we know, women tend to speak in a higher pitch, although not me, but women do tend to speak in a higher pitch. And we know that speaking in a higher pitch denotes a little bit less authority and commands a little bit less respect. So again, a lot of different things just in terms of genetics and how we're born around how we communicate that can really impact women in the workplace. So first question I'd love to ask you guys, especially as female leaders and also HR leaders, would love to get your thoughts on your experience and how women are perceived in general when speaking up in the workplace versus their male counterparts.
Well, if I can start sharing, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. It's great to be here. And for me, Karen, this is a mix of, knowledge and empathy when we are talking and when we are, as a business leader, speaking up. And so I think we have this amazing opportunity to share. This is the way I try, and I'm with some leader women around me, trying to put the experience, but with sense of humor on the same place, to try to balance that, but always trying to have the result and being productive, because at the end, this is what we need to show. But empathy for me is the best part of that, what we can share as a woman, because we have that. It's much easier for us, is my feeling. And so when we speak up, we can have this, and I think we can have a good results on that.
Yeah, I'd like to mimic some of the things that, or at least highlight some of the things that you talked about. I think that women can bring, and often do bring, a different perspective in it. And what we know from the research is that the two things that are most impactful is your physicality and your tone. The tone of how you bring things to the table and knowing your audience. So typically people who are in leadership, particularly the higher levels of leadership, it's important to start with, this is the solution, here are the issues that have to be dealt with, and then this is the problem. And as you move towards the middle of the organization, look to say, here's how the process works, this is what the issues are, and then here's the solution out of it, or vice versa in terms of the solution. And so I think it's, women can do a lot of things simply knowing how to use their presence and their tone in meetings, both formal meetings as well as meetings that are open, that can position them to be heard more and not overlooked as much.
And I think in Asia, because we have quite a lot of countries in Asia, I would say. And as compared, well, because I'm from Hong Kong, and I would say that countries or places like Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, I would say that female has a relatively higher status compared with the other Asian countries like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, or even China. So for me, well, because I'm based in Hong Kong in terms of work, so I would say that I can see a more equal opportunity for me in Hong Kong. But as compared, I would say, because I travel quite a lot when I was working to Korea or to Japan, I can see that people, especially the female workers in Korea, they say, especially when they are entry-level staff, some of them even need to serve tea to the male workers, even though they are in the same level. So I would say that in Asia, it is quite, the status of the female quite varies from country to country. And well, of course, the status of female or male, I think it is quite stereotyping in Asia. And say in Asia, we expect women to speak politely, nicely, with a very nice tone of voice, and female and for male, because, well, they are very strong and of course, we expect some of the people, we expect them, they have more power and then they give instructions. So this is the kind of perception in Asia, I would say.
Interesting.
Thing. And you've all worked also in global organizations where you're, sitting around a table with people from all over the world. And even just hearing this, this bit from what you all have experienced, what's it like when you're sitting around a table when you've got people from all over the world? Do you see that people from different parts of the world are listening and hearing women differently? Is it more exacerbated? Is it not? What's that like given your experience?
Well,
Yeah.
when I did it, it was much more, the thing I had to contend with was being an American, being out there. So the physicality of it, and different countries react differently to you being an American. They definitely react differently because I'm a person of color, I'm Black American, and my voice, I have what has been nicely called a theater voice. So it immediately commands attention. And so for me, it was about understanding how to navigate the customs of the country that I may be in, but also understanding that I had to pay attention to my presence. And sometimes I could be disrespectful by speaking too much or not lowering the tone of my voice or being slightly more questionable. We're in America, we're in America, I try very hard not to have that lift at the end of my questions, kinds of thing. So I think as you move around, you really have to be conscious and present and think about before you enter a meeting, who's at the table, what's respectful for them, not push them too far out of their comfort zone so that they can engage you, listen to what you're saying and not be so feel attacked because of the way you come at them.
Do you find, Denise, too, that is more extreme or more important at the more senior levels? Sally raised an interesting point of how women are treated and perceived at more junior levels versus more senior levels.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see that really is really critical, especially for women that are at senior levels, and how that might be different than more junior levels?
Mm-hmm.
Being global, you mean? Are you asking me?
In particular, being a female and being at a table and having to be in a meeting, and if you're a senior executive or if you're more junior, are there different things that you're coaching or helping senior women work on in terms of their communication that might be different than when they were earlier in their career?
Yeah, level does play into it. And so maybe some of the other ladies can speak to it. But the other thing that I think at the time when I was moving around, America has a great stature in the world, period. And so to be from an American company opens doors that maybe you wouldn't get if you were from the same country. And so just by having your presence and the company package that you bring to the table gives you more privilege than you might get if you were from the home country, to say. And so you have to manage that too. So it's not just, who I am physically, but understanding the presence and the power of the country that you represent for. At junior levels, even when I was, kind of a manager level and traveling globally, because I came from America, there was just oh, you're an American, and oh, you're from Chicago, oh, you're kind of thing. And so there was a curiosity that gave me a lot of privilege in doing it. Now, I'm not sure that I would have that same privilege if I was a manager coming from a home country that I got here. But I learned very early on that you have to know that people are reacting to you on multiple levels. It's not just I'm a woman, it's the package, the full package that I bring. And I think oftentimes we don't think about that. Leaders in general, I find, they just don't think about it. I'm just a person. And that's where we lose power in the conversation.
I think also one of the interesting.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay,
In my case, as you were mentioned, I can tell you the opposite because I'm from South America. Sometimes we have, the bias from us, or we need to be much more being woman, has the language that is different, and to position ourselves and position myself as a senior leader. And on the same time, we are seen as a country that is like, is not on the top of the scale. So it's harder in this case when I am in a meeting with, teams from abroad. And it's another effort that I need to do to put myself to be respectful, but on the same time to trying to be prepared for what's coming, because sometimes they look at us like, oh, I don't know, they're like a third world, I don't know if they're prepared for that. And so how to position ourselves as a woman, as a leader, being from South America, it's the opposite of being American, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for me, well,
Go ahead, Sally.
yeah, and for me, because I said I'm in Hong Kong, I'm based in Hong Kong, and when I say participate in a meeting and talk to, no matter is more senior staff than me or like my peers or those my subordinates, I think I can just tell and talk as what I want to do, because in Hong Kong, as said, we women have quite equal status versus male. I would say that. So that's why I don't really have a lot of difficulties when I communicate during the meeting. But I can also observe that in some of the Asian market, say as mentioned in Korea or in Japan, women's voice usually has lower respect, I would say. Because say for example in Korea, even though female got the most senior position within an organization, but still some of the male worker don't really listen to the instructions or the directions from the female top executive. This is one of my observations. But even though those female subordinates, they don't really listen to the female senior executive. And once I was in a phone call with two female staff from Korea. One is the most senior person within the company, and then the other one is the subordinates of the senior executive. They just argue during the phone call, because I think it's quite sad that in some of the countries, female workers may not really want to report to another female. I would say it's quite sad, I would say. Well, but of course I understand to some of their point of view is cultural. I would say that. Well, because culturally if they can report to a male boss, it seems that they have a higher status. It's sad, but yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think that's just in Hong Kong or some of the other Asian countries. I think that also happens here in America. That we still struggle with the idea of reporting to a woman, and will that be, how will that be taken in the whole thing?
Yes. But well, my personal experience is I also agree that to report to a male boss is easier. It's very sad. It's very sad. I know it's very sad, but it's easier. But Karen is different, I would say.
Yeah.
Totally different.
This will be very interesting when we touch on the leadership piece at the end, because this also gets back to how do we all and how have we been conditioned to think about leadership and what leadership looks like, and then who do we want to report to as a result of it. Very interesting. I do have one more question around executive presence and communication style, though, in particular, which I've had to deal with it a lot personally, and also had to have coached and counseled a lot of women that I work with, is working with men in the workplace who have a very aggressive communication style. And what I have seen with a lot of women, again, as an HR person putting my HR hat on, is that a lot of women view that as an attack, and it's very difficult to get into a productive exchange when you have someone who's very confrontational, making their point of view or arguing your point of view. And I would love to see what you all have seen and experienced as HR leaders. So I do think that's one of the areas that is problematic for women, especially in the workplace.
Yeah, I had this experience like 8 years ago. I remember when I was in the executive committee, I was the only woman with another 7 men, male on the group. And I really started to see how I'm going to be heard here. So I got myself a lot of time speaking like a male, trying to be much more aggressive and say some slangs and things like this to try to be accepted. And at the end, I think for that time was good because they really saw me like a woman with pants. They mentioned me like that. So it was a way for me to be respected by them and to be heard. But I see this does not work anymore today. Like 8 years after that, I think I am an aggressive person when I am talking. I like to position myself, but I don't need to be like them anymore. So was good on that time, but does not work anymore today. But yes, sometimes we need, as Denise mentioned, we need to be prepared, knowing with who we are talking to, but to be, consistent. And I think depends if sometimes we want to be more soft or we want to be more aggressive, depends on that. But we need to be ourselves and that we are representing what we want to represent as a leader and as not only a female, but as a person that wants to change something. But was really in the past was really, ridiculous in the end. Yeah, I got results. So.
And ultimately that is it, right? I can tell you. So one of my roles that I had was in the building construction trades industry, which is, a little bit on the salty side in terms of their language. And I quickly learned how to turn a phrase that I could not ever think about turning now in the boardroom.
Yeah.
But again, you have to really pay attention to your audience and what is part of the kind of the way the playing field is played, right? And so, and even as I think back on it, or at least I'd like to remember it this way, that sometimes you enter one way and then you can gradually move people or move back into who you are. And so I like to think that maybe when I started, I was a little bit more timid about salty language, but then as I understood that was the playing field, I could back off a little, not a lot, but enough that I could get back into a more comfortable status in terms of talking to people. And it was also at that time that I learned about tone and tonality and when to lean in and when to, kind of not say things very strategically. So if my voice was absent, I found that people would be going, "So what you think?" And that was my moment to say something out of it. And so I think it really is about understanding where you're at and knowing that no matter what you do, you're always gonna, if you're the only woman or the only person of color, it really doesn't matter. You're gonna stand out. Get used to it. What can you say? So the question becomes, how do you use that? Get comfortable with being the only, get comfortable with being that person that stands out, and then read the room and figure out how you're going to be able to navigate and hold people's attention when it's appropriate, and then turn the mic over to other people when that's appropriate.
And for me, I think I'm pretty lucky, I would say, because in the past, in most of my positions, I work with female more versus male. So for us, we just do whatever we want. It means during the meeting to talk the kind of language, we don't really need to care much. And and as I said, because in Hong Kong, we are quite good. I mean, in terms of the social status of female, so we are pretty okay in the past. But I can say that once in a company, we have more male staff than female staff. And in fact, the senior executive, my boss, he was quite good in fact. But once he slipped and then he just have a foul language in front of the whole meeting. But we just laugh, and then after that we just pretend nothing happened. But I can understand that for some of the male staff or even female staff, sometimes we say something like this. I mean, foul language. But in Hong Kong, most of the time we are pretty casual in the meetings. But of course, we are not using this kind of words every day or in every meeting. But we respect or we accept this kind of things, but not a lot. But sometimes I know that they just speak it out accidentally. So that's why we are okay with that sometimes.
Well, I think you all also, I'm thinking about solutions, and you all have highlighted a few really important things for people to be thinking about. And one of the biggest ones was kind of knowing your audience and understanding your audience, and then being able to really impact your tone, your messaging, being able to leverage humor and empathy, and really coming with your authentic selves into meetings and not trying to put on the pants, as Fulvia said earlier, but to keep on the skirt, maybe with some leggings underneath. And that is okay. So it was a great discussion. And I'm going to move us on to the next one, which is going to be around feedback, development, and performance, things that are near and dear to many women as they come in and move up through the workplace. And there are a few things that we know just from our own experience and also from research. The first, which is around feedback, that women are a lot less likely to get feedback that is very specifically tied to outcomes or goals. It tends to be more focused on their communication style, how effectively they're able to influence peers, and a lot of it tends to be negative. A very common thing that you'll see on women's performance evaluation is something like, her speaking style and approach can be off-putting to people at times. And women, there tends to be a much heavier emphasis on these soft skills and communication skills for women as opposed to men. And what happens in that case, it means men are probably getting different kinds of developmental opportunities that women are not getting. And ultimately that leads to how women are being evaluated at the end of the year. And there was a really interesting study a couple of years ago that looked at all the attributes that were associated with men or women. I think men only had a couple of negative attributes. There were things like, arrogant, aggressive, and irresponsible. And for women, it was a list of like 15, disorganized, scattered, excitable, frivolous, indecisive. So again, how people are getting feedback, how they're being developed, how they're being evaluated. There have been lots of differences across the genders that companies are still grappling with today. So given that's the context, I'll start out with the first question. Again, in your experience as an HR leader and as a female leader, what have you seen or experienced in terms of how feedback might differ between men and women at work?
Well, I think for women, particularly Black women in America, the moniker of being the angry bee is one that we tend to run away from. If your tone, if your position, if you're passionate about it, we get lots and lots of feedback that says, you're a little aggressive. Could you, I was a little intimidated by you. And I remember a particular time someone said, well, Denise, in that meeting, you could have been a little softer and you were very intimidating. Now, what Zoom doesn't allow you to see is I'm about 5'1". Most men hanging around me are 6 foot better because that's kind of the American model. And so the chairs are like dwarfing me. At the time, I was probably, 20, 30 pounds lighter. So, on a good day, I was pretty light, pretty small. And I remember it probably wasn't the best thing I could have done, but I immediately kind of leaned in and just went, so you're telling me that 6 foot tall men are scared of a 5 foot woman? And the color drained out of this guy's face. Oh, well, of course. And I was like, oh, good. So then tell me what I could have done better. And, it really is about what is it that they are uncomfortable with? And I see in my, my executive coaching and training piece now that because we've got this big call about Me Too, that men are even more reticent about giving feedback in general, not just, hey, your presence, the power that you bring, the tone of what you're doing. It's just become an even bigger barrier for getting good actionable feedback. But I just think it's difficult for people to give feedback to people who are not like them in general. And just we exacerbate it by the culture that we're in or the times and environment that we're in. And we're going to have to figure out how to help people be comfortable, but also ask good questions around what feedback do we need.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a lot of times I see that if are not focused on the soft skills, it's too much generalistic. So talks about, oh, because you didn't do that, you could do better. But where is the example? Where is the situation that I can understand and change that? Or my employee can change that. So this is something that happens a lot, not only focus on the soft skills, but trying to be so generalistic that you don't understand what this person wants to tell you or where you need to improve something. So I always try to, I share that with my teams as well. And this is what I try to do in my case, is really to push on examples, to bring the conversation in results and what did I did in that time? What should I do different in actions? Because otherwise it's going to be like a very bar conversation that doesn't take us anywhere. So it's not nice.
Yeah. I agree with Fulvia that, well, say when during the feedback sections, no matter I receive feedback or I give feedback to the others, of course, I think it is very important to give real life examples. It is very important. And to let them know that, okay, because sometimes we talking about some very vague feedback, but say if we can quote some kind of example, I think it is good. And I think for in Asia, female also receive plenty of feedback on their soft skills, like communications, tone of voice, or even their emotional control, something like that. Because I also think that it is a kind of stereotyping to women. So that's why usually women in Asia, we receive feedback similar to that. But it also depends on the level of the female staff. Of course, the higher the level, of course, we will receive feedback more on, say, on the strategic side or on the direction side, something like that, but lesser on the soft skill side. Yeah.
That's a good, I want to make sure people hear that point that you made, Sally, about, the feedback that we get, even from women, tends to be more about physicality and tone and soft skills kinds of things. And that's something that we have to pick up, and we need to not role model the same things we hear from men, because that's what's happening. It's a man, I was taught by a man leader, and so therefore that must be what feedback looks like. And I think that's one of the things that we have to break the stereotype around and really force the idea of actionable feedback that matters. And, don't focus on what I can't control. So I'm fortunate. I was born with a deep voice and a theater voice as it is, but not all women are there. So, and you're not going to suddenly get a deep voice. Help me understand how I can get, be paid attention to from the numbers, from the impact of what I've done, impact of what my team might be done, those kinds of things. And so I think that, we're picking up the wrong models from senior men, and when they give us feedback, and then we're giving the same kind of feedback to other women. And we need to break that model. So that was a good point. And I didn't want that to go unnoticed.
Great point. And I'll pick up also on what you said earlier, Denise, which is that it's difficult for people to give feedback across lines of difference, whether it's across a cultural barrier, a racial barrier, or a gender barrier. And the point where, in general, most women work for men. So when we talk about the leaky pipeline, the more senior you are, the less likely you are to actually work for a woman. So what does that mean as you've got men in all those senior positions giving feedback to women that are a level below them, and what is it continuing to perpetuate? It's a huge challenge, I think, for companies to overcome. And I think the suggestions that everyone talked about on training organizations and leaders to provide very specific outcome-driven feedback and get moving away from kind of the soft skills communication feedback would certainly put everyone one step forward at least. And I think also this gets into then kind of how performance is evaluated and looking at performance evaluations, and you all have had to either be part of the performance evaluation process or counsel senior leaders during that process. What have you seen are kind of some of the big challenges, knowing that all this feedback ultimately rolls up into how women are, how their performance is evaluated in the workplace?
I think the first challenge that, we have to reimagine performance evaluations in any way. So general complaints that, I got as a senior HR person or an HR person, business partner in general were, surprises. It was December before I figured out, my boss just told me that I didn't do X, Y, Z. So this whole idea of surprises around what could have been changed before, when you don't have continuous feedback or at least regular check-ins, what happens is the trust goes down. You let me fail. And now you want, how are you going to help me? How are you going to help me grow? How are you going to actually help me get better on the future? Now, if you have a broken system, then you have to be the one that actively goes out and make sure that you get the feedback at regular intervals at times when you can change the perception, and it just makes it a little harder. The other piece of it is in general, I think across the spectrum, we're just not good at giving feedback on performance reviews. They're just fraught with emotional triggers. No one likes to give bad news. We've got the bell curve going on. And I just finished up a training for a company. And of course, we're talking about performance reviews. And clearly we were talking about being a meets expectation is a good performance. And they hire the best. So it's like everybody from Harvard, but even at Harvard, some people are C students. And, and it doesn't feel good because we keep pushing this mantra of excellence. And so the system itself, the way we think about it, is just fraught with, pitfalls for everyone. And add that on top of that we're just not good at giving feedback, particularly actionable, growth-oriented feedback to people in general. And, the old saying of those who are marginalized will get even less than those who are not marginalized or in the majority. And so that just exacerbates this whole, in my mind, this whole thing about performance feedback.
And I see that we need to really, really grow a lot in this process, not only in the feedback. I fully agree that we have this, we leave the full year with, a lot of things happen and leave for the last minute. But I think we have a problem before that. I think we don't set a specific and clear goals to those persons. For us, when we don't set that, that's why it's so difficult to give feedback, because sometimes the person didn't have an idea what was expecting from her or from, from the team. And that's why we have those surprises. And this is really, for me, sad, because we cannot have person being surprised or, I was thinking that I was doing an amazing job. I was so motivated. And then I get the feedback that is like, oh, people don't see you that way. You need to, where were you until now? Because I think is that the point. When we don't set the nice and a very smart feedback, we have problems, goals, we have problems on giving feedback. So it's really a big problem on all this curve and all this development process, I think. We have lots of learn still.
And I think the objective of giving feedback is to reflect the true nature of the person. Well, regardless it is he or she. It is very important. And well, of course, the feedback may be periodical or like a regular one. But I think it is very important, say for an organization, if they really want to have a very good feedback system, it is important that for the, I would say, rater, which is like the supervisor, they have a standardized evaluation criteria. It's not only on paper, but also say each of the rater or each of the supervisors, they have the same kind of perspective on certain, say, quality. Say, if it is 10 points, for example, for this staff, they need to say that, okay, if the staff achieves this kind of level, then they are 10 points, something like that. That means to standardize all the evaluations, raters within the organization. I think it is very important, regardless the people that we are going to rate is a female or male.
I think you guys have also captured a lot of the suggestions that organizations should be considering, and I'll get three of them, which I think you all touched on. One of the first ones was having really specific goals, because without having specific goals, it's then hard to give feedback on goals. And having feedback be an ongoing process, not just once a year, to really minimize surprises and allow for more frequent communications. And the last one, which Sally mentioned, which is really ensuring it's gender neutral by having a standard criteria that applies to everyone, regardless. So, again, there are lots of things that organizations can be doing to make feedback and performance a lot more gender useful, but more importantly, a lot more specific and helpful for people that are on the receiving end of it.
And I'd just like to add one other thing. We often think in organizations in silos, and I think it is really important that human resources or leaders in an organization do calibration across the organization. Because there's nothing more demotivating than you're working side by side in a different department or with a different supervisor, and that the supervisor is perceived as being an easier grader than the other one. And so when we talk about standardization, it's not just having a rating scale, but it's really having calibration conversations during the year to ensure that everybody, if you're a 3 or an 8, we see a 3 and an 8 the same way.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
Yeah, because calibration helps to try to escape from that situation that, oh, I prefer this person or that one because you have like a drink or whatever, because they sometimes we put together not only the profession but the colleague side. So if you don't have this calibration, we have this the chance to do that, and what is really bad as well.
Agree.
Point.
Absolutely. And all of this is probably a good segue into talking about leadership, which is fraught with challenges for women in the workplace. And when you think about kind of feedback and development and performance, all of that ultimately paints a picture of what a leader looks like in an organization, how they should be acting, how they should be behaving, and also who ultimately gets promoted into those positions of leadership. And as we've known for decades, the definition of leadership has been largely male. It is definitely moving over to more female for lots of reasons. But we also know there is a huge gap for a whole variety of reasons, from discrimination to different needs and expectations to a whole host of things. And as a result of that gap in perception, what we see is a continued leaky pipeline for women in the workplace. I think the most recent Mercer study from 2020 had, I think, kind of entry-level staff that were female, about 47%. Manager levels, 37% were women. And by the time they looked at executive leadership, it was only a little bit over 20%. So again, we continue to see less women at more senior roles, which again is a reflection of how people perceive leaders. So I open with that, but I would love to hear everyone's perspective on how your different organizations or clients or individuals that you've worked with think about leadership, particularly men versus women, and what differences or different expectations might exist that either are helpful or hurtful for women in the workplace.
Well, I think I came back to LV because one of the things that they present me is that exactly this change. We have more than 50% of our senior leaders female, what is really good to see this change. And I think we see all the results around that, all the creativity and all, you know, the impactful message that those females are sharing with the team and put them so motivated, even in the quarantine on this crazy time that we have this opportunity to be like a productive, but on the same time to be close to people, because we have this as a female. It's one of our characteristics that is really important. So I think this is, I see this in a very positive way in my, I can tell the same in Tory Burch. We had this as well. We have a lot of females in a senior position, and what was very good. And I see this change. I see that we are in the group, our group, this is changing a lot, and we are fighting for that. Is one of the cause, you know, to have the same level of salary, to have this gender equalization. And so I think for me now it's a good moment, because I see this in a very positive way in the group and in the companies that I'm in contact.
And for me, in my past, well, because I have been in the retail industry for quite a long time, and female likes to join a retail industry. Well, perhaps because of the product, because of the industry, it is very glamorous, I would say. So that's why people, I mean, female would like to join in the retail industry. And when I did some recruitment in the past, I just hire without saying this candidate is a male or female. So, and I can see that in some of the Asia countries, they don't really discriminate when they hire. But of course, for some of the roles, of course, it is better to have a male, say, for example, for the projects, which is like construction, something like that, because this is the kind of physical strength, perhaps, for a male to be in this kind of field. So, but in general, in the hiring side, we don't really discriminate. It is, oh, this is the role for female, or that is the role for male. So I would say that it is quite equal in terms of this kind of position or role. But of course, I would say that in some of the countries, in Asia countries, we still have this kind of perception on male and female. Not only in, I mean, not in the retail industry, but in some other industry. They may prefer male candidates or male workers because, well, in terms of, say, family side, well, they may think that the male can have more flexibility, say, for example, in mobility or in traveling. And sad thing is because they also see that male don't really take a lot of a very long maternity leave. So that's why in some of the company, they prefer to have a male staff instead of female.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you know, you mentioned something very, very interesting, because this vision that we have that a woman, like the female, likes more to go to retail because of the and everything. It's true, but on the same hand, we need to prove that we are very good. We are not there only because we are in love by products. We are there because we are business woman. We can handle the job. And sometimes this make the situation a little bit, harder, because we need to prove not because of the purse or because of the shoes.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and a good example is different from the one you mentioned is that we have some cases that we promote a female that was pregnant, and we promote a person during this period to be the head of the business. She handled very well, and so sometimes we need to be out of the box and try things different and see that it's not a disease, it's not like a problem. We can do it, and we, we can do it in a much more pretty way because we are colored, we are, females.
Fully capable of doing it. So,
Yes.
because I traverse so many industries, I think COVID and the lockdown is going to be very interesting as we go forward. So we have those jobs and companies that used to think that only way we could measure performance was actually seeing eyeball to eyeball. I can see you working, I can see the effort, therefore I know who's smarter, faster, more talented out of it. And now that we're kind of away from that eyeball and we have to actually look at results, my hope is that will continue in those particular organizations, because the conversation is growing around, well, tell me again why we have to be co-located. Where is the real value in us being co-located? But then we have retail, and then we have hospitality. And both retail and hospitality tend to be female dominated at the lower ranks or the lower positions. Hospitality is harder, I think, in terms of you have to be physically out there. And I'm not sure we're going to see the kind of opportunity to move from I have to see you, which versus looking for results. What are the results that person has to bring to the table? And so I think we're going to see, some industries make bigger advances, more opportunities for women, because we're just shifting because we have to do work differently, versus those that are not shifting because the work has to be physical. You have to actually show up to do the work. And we're not spending a lot of time because businesses are suffering from income problems, issues, particularly hospitality and retail. The sales are just not there. And so the first thing to go always is what? Executive development, is leadership development. And that really should be the last thing to go, because what we need organizations to really fire up. How do we help people make the shift in the moment so that the bottom line continues? And if women are running these stores, women are frontline workers, they're the hospitality, they're in the care management, et cetera, then we really have to focus a lot more on how do we help them break the stereotype of what used to be, because we could see people eyeball to eyeball, to move to what is it that you're bringing to the table? How is that performance measured? How do we calibrate that? And so I think, for folks like us who are out here kind of socializing the idea, what we have to start socializing is getting away from this physically seeing effort and judging effort as the measure of performance to what are the results achieved and how do we balance the results. Did you achieve, if the goal was 3%, first question is, did you achieve 3% growth? If the answer is yes, then this way. If it's no, okay, what were the mitigating? But you did not make the goal. And we have to start shifting our conversation to be more about that. And we have to get companies to stop cutting executive training, management training, and doing it online sometimes. But we need to have them really focus on how do you become much more flexible? How do you become much more accurate about measuring performance and helping people make that transition, being more creative in their jobs to get the kind of results and keep that feedback going. And I think some industries are going to do a better job than others. And if we're not careful, what we're going to be saying is, well, look, these are over here doing well because we're really good at separating and holding up. Well, we have Denise and she's an EVP and look at her, she's a person of color. Why can't you do that? Kind of conversation. Why can't you be that one? And so we have to really watch for that kind of marginalization. There's the opportunity for that to continue. And we've, as a group, trying to push the idea, we've got to be able to have a more cohesive argument about How do we change the way we think about how performance is measured, how we think about developing people who are going to be leaders, not just those with the title, but those who are actually doing the work? And how do we actually bring into the conversation, there's some people who just don't want to have the role of a leader, but without them maintaining the operation, without their effort, without their brilliance at the front line, handling customers who right now are pretty edgy in America. I have a lot of retail clients and they are exhausted by the end of the day because people aren't nice. They don't want to wear a mask. They come in with an attitude, and we're not helping managers have conversations around how do you give good customer service in the face of customers who don't want to change and are not necessarily nice. And the numbers are shifting. So, in our retail and hospitality, it's about, well, you got to have, 25%, 35% turnover, conversion, raise the average sale. How do you do that when you are exhausted by the end of your shift?
And I'm just going to jump in. The one thing that this underscores for me is the health and well-being, physical, mental, like that's not come up in this conversation, but I just wanted to jump in, Denise, because to me, what you just said, what I have heard over and over and over again, burnout, exhaustion, mental health and well-being issues in a way. And so leaders, I think, have this huge opportunity right now to start to make this connection. It's just push through, just get it done, just do this. But when we talk about the bigger issues around grief and mourning that's going on with people, that's very different right now, and helping leaders have that language, better, not just emotional intelligence, but I loved the cultural intelligence. We don't talk enough about CI and how that connects to EI, I think in the context of leadership training. But I really, because I'm sorry to jump in like that, but boy, I have heard this from so many different sectors. It's not just in one sector, and particularly from female leaders.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think what's interesting that you all have touched on is COVID has exacerbated the need for what I would call the traditional female leadership traits in terms of empathy, focusing on the emotion, focusing on communication, being connected with your employees, helping them put their families first and enabling flexibility. A lot of that, women are at a huge advantage because we've had to manage that throughout our careers. And as you go into a position of leadership, women are naturally just more able to do that because of their composition, but also because of their life experience. So I do believe COVID will be a game changer for women in leadership and how organizations think about and define leadership.
But I think we have to bring that topic to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to point out the good, because naturally as human beings, we're really quick to pick out the bad and to focus on what's the challenge, what's the opportunity. And the old model of leadership is really about what are the problems we're solving versus what are the opportunities we're grabbing.
Mm-hmm.
100%. Well, I hate to cut us off. I am sure we could be talking for at least another hour or two, which is always what makes these conversations so engaging. I can't thank you enough for all of you sharing your perspectives, your voice. I have learned so much just listening today, and I now have probably another whole set of questions that I would love to dive into with all of you. I hope that everybody will take the opportunity to download this. This is free from GW4W. And this came out, we put this out back in 2018. And I think that when we talk about caregiving and women's issues and equity versus equality, and how do we start to look at this? We also have available a really interesting think tank paper where we threw out the question, what does gender equity mean to a whole variety of people? And a secondary question, what does feminine and masculine leadership look like to you? How would you describe that? So it's offered free through GW4W. We are happy to share that. And we look forward to continuing this conversation. I think there is so much to be learned. Can we move away from soft and hard skills and maybe start talking about connection and action skills? As a language change, I don't know. We've thrown that one out there a little bit too. And we want to invite everybody to our next heart-to-heart conversation. We actually have two back-to-back in December. One is focused on women, leadership, and peace building, global peace building. Very excited for that conversation. And the companion piece to that is women, leadership, and spirituality. So we have business leaders that come from very different spiritual practices, not necessarily religious. Some are. And how does that influence us as leaders? And we hope that that will inspire us to take some new and exciting ideas into 2021. Thank you so much, everyone, for your voice, for your leadership, and for truly helping to make this a more inclusive and hopefully sustainable world going forward. So we thank our audience, and we look forward to seeing you again on our next Heart to Heart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.